Hey guys, so we're going to be drawing and shading a cylinder. The first thing we're going to do is draw a couple guidelines. I'm going to start by drawing a 3-inch line. Then I'm going to leave a pretty big gap and I'm going to draw another 3-inch line that's parallel to that first one. These are going to be guidelines for the bases of our cylinder. And I'm going to draw this shape called an ellipse. Notice how I start by drawing really light and I go around and around a couple times. That's for me to just sort of go around a few times to get the shape right before I go back in and make it a little bit darker. So an ellipse is sort of like an oval. It's a flattened circle. So I would recommend you go in lightly and go around and around a couple times before you go in and you make it darker. Then I'm going to clean up the edges and I'm going to erase those initial guidelines I drew so that I just end up with the ellipse. So the reason we're drawing these shapes, these ellipses, is because if you think about a cylinder, the two bases of the cylinder, the top and bottom, are circles. If you were looking at the top of a cylinder straight down, you would see it as a circle. But because of our vantage point, because of the way we're looking at it, we're viewing it from the side. So we're not going to see it as a perfect circle. It's going to be slightly distorted. It's going to be slightly flattened. So that's why instead of drawing two circles, we're drawing these more flattened versions, which are the ellipses, as our two bases of the cylinder. Now we draw the sides of the cylinder, and the two sides should be parallel to each other as well. And after you draw on the sides, you might have to go back to your ellipses and make some adjustments to make sure they actually fit within the sides and actually reach the edges of both. So now just on the bottom ellipse, I'm only erasing the top half of it. So now we're drawing the shadow. Out of this bottom corner, I'm going to draw a 4-inch line coming down at an angle like this. Now I'm going to draw another 4-inch line coming from the other side, and this one should be parallel to the first one. So I'm looking at the edge of my ruler, and I want the edge of my ruler to look as though it's parallel to that first line. Now, this part of the circle, it's going to be curved because it's going to match the same curve as our cylinder. So to connect those two lines to close out the shadow, you're going to draw a curved line, and you're going to try to match the same curve of your ellipse of the base of your cylinder. So for this drawing, we're imagining our light source is coming from the top left. That's going to determine where our shadows are going to be. So real quick, what I'm going to do for this drawing, this cylinder that we're drawing, the top of the cylinder is open rather than closed. So think of like an opened soup can. So to show this, I'm drawing a little rim or a little edge around the top by just drawing another ellipse within the first one we drew to show that there's just a little rim around the outside, showing that we can see the inside and it's open. Alright, so since the light is coming from the left, we know most of the shadows will be on the right. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm imagining a line going halfway, or dividing my cylinder in half, and I'm shading in the right half of the cylinder. And I'm not going too dark right now. This is a light gray, a lightish medium gray, and I'm just shading in that whole right half. Then I'm going to clean up the edges. Now within that area, in the middle of that area, leaving space on both sides, I'm going to shade a smaller area that's even darker. So I'm leaving gaps on both sides where it's still lighter, but I'm shading a section within there that's darker. That's going to be what we're going to call our core shadow. So now I'm moving to the left, but as we move to the left, it should be getting lighter. So I'm going as light as I possibly can. I'm doing the lightest gray I possibly can. And I'm keeping that very left side completely white. On the very left edge, I'm not adding any shading because I want it to be white. But right next to that white edge, I'm adding some very, very, very light gray shading. So now we're going to build up the core shadow. So within that darker area, I'm going to shade an even darker area that's even smaller. That's just going to fit right in the middle there, leaving gaps on either side. But now what I want to do is I want all of these different shades to look like they blend together. I don't want it to look like there's just a random dark stripe that all of a sudden appears on the surface. So this is a curved surface, and we want to imagine that as it's curving away from our light source, it's gradually getting darker. The key word there is gradual. So it curves away from the light source, and it starts to go from white to light gray to medium gray to dark gray. And then back on that right side, it starts to get a little bit lighter again. So that very right edge of our cylinder, we're not shading that completely dark. We're leaving that a little bit lighter, because that's going to be what we call our reflected light. So I'm just going back more and more, and I'm just adding more and more layers of shading. My goal here is to make these different shades of gray all look like they blend together. Again, I don't want it to look like just a big dark stripe all of a sudden appeared on my cylinder. I want it to look like it's a curved surface. So on the very left side is the highlight. This darkest part is called the core shadow, and then around the back is the reflected light. So if you think about it, this is a curved surface that curves all the way around. So some of that light coming from our light source is curving around the back side and coming through, and that's the reflected light. So now we're going to be shading in the inside. So the way the light is hitting, it's hitting that edge, and that edge on the left side is actually going to be blocking the light. So instead of on the surface where we have it being lightest, the closest to our light source, it's actually the opposite, because that edge there on the left is blocking the light so that there's no light reaching in on that left side, but then it starts to spill in on the right side. So you start with it being dark on the left side, and then it gradually gets lighter as it goes to the right. And that's for the inside. So now I'm going back to the outside, and I'm just, again, I want those different shades, those different sections to look like they blend together. So I'm just adding more layers of shading because I want it to gradually go from light to dark as it curves around, and then go back to light again at the very right edge. So this is what we call the cast shadow. It's the shadow that's being cast on the surface. So the darkest area of the cast shadow is going to be the area that's directly underneath the edge of our shape, because that's what's going to be blocking the most light. So that's going to be the darkest area. So I'm going to shade that really dark. But then as we move away from the object, some of that reflected light, all of that light that's bouncing around this area is starting to spill in from the sides, and it's going to start to brighten it up. So as we get further away from the shape, it starts to get gradually lighter. It shouldn't get super light. We still want the shadow to look really dark, but it should just get a little bit lighter gradually as you get further away from the object. So again, I'm adding more layers of shading because I don't want, just that big dark stripe. I want everything to look like it blends together. Remembering that this is a curved surface area as we're curving away from our light source. So it should gradually go from white to light gray to medium gray to dark gray, and then back to light on the right side there. Now I'm erasing just to make sure I still have my highlight there on the left side. I want to make sure there's still some area of white in there. Just adding a bit of finishing touches. And that's it.